In a world where second chances are rare and trust is easily broken, one man and one dog defied the odds. This is not just a story about rescue, it's about redemption, resilience, and the silent promises that change lives forever. As Ernest Hemingway once said, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at the broken places." Stay with us through every twist and revelation, because by the end, you'll witness not only survival, but triumph. Watch until the final moment to embrace the powerful lesson this journey holds. And remember, subscribing helps us create more stories that matter. Your support is our strength. The Great Falls livestock auction was not the kind of place where hope usually lingered. Under the high metal rafters, the air was thick with dust, sweat, and the sharp tang of old hay. Buyers gathered in rows of worn wooden benches, their hats pulled low and their eyes sharp, not for kindness, but for profit. Every animal that passed through the corral gate was a number, a weight, a potential investment, nothing more. That day, a cold wind whispered through the gaps in the walls, unnoticed by most. But for one creature, it might as well have been a last breath. From the side gate, a pit bull was led into the ring. No handler touched him. No leash guided his steps. He limped alone into the harsh light spilling through the gaps in the metal roof. His body spoke of a life written in scars. His coat, once a bold, deep brown, was now streaked with mud and patches where fur no longer grew. His left hind leg dragged behind him with every labored step, stiff and reluctant as though it had given up months ago. His eyes, once perhaps soft or curious, now held the flat, distant look of something that had stopped expecting kindness. As the dog reached the center of the ring, the noise in the barnyard shifted. Voices lowered. Boots scraped on wood. People leaned back, arms folded across their chests. "Don't waste your bid," someone muttered. "That one's done for," another said. "Might have been used for fighting. Look at that leg. He's dangerous. Liability." "Not worth the feed." The auctioneer, a man named Brooks, who had spent 30 years shouting over cattle and horses, cleared his throat and tapped his clipboard. He tried to summon his usual lively tone, but even he hesitated. "We have here a male pit bull." "No registration. Injured. Starting bid, $10. Silence. Not even a polite shake of the head from the usual soft-hearted bidders. Brooks glanced around. $5? Nothing. The dog did not beg for their mercy. He did not whimper or try to charm. He simply stood there, trembling slightly, shoulders hunched as if bracing for the inevitable. He kept his head low, his gaze steady but resigned. It wasn't defiance. It was acceptance. Brooks sighed. "No takers, then we'll—" From the back row, a hand lifted. It wasn't a grand gesture. It didn't wave or call attention to itself. It rose quietly, fingers weathered, palms steady, as though the man behind it had been waiting for this precise moment. Heads turned. Conversations halted. Even the auctioneer blinked in surprise. The man was older, maybe late 60s, early 70s. His shoulders were broad beneath a battered leather jacket that looked as though it had seen more years and more miles than any truck in the parking lot. His boots were caked in dried Montana mud, the kind that clung to soles for days. A gray beard traced his jaw, blending into the silver that streaked his hair. There was a deep scar along his left cheek, fading now but unmistakable, as if it had once marked the path of a life-altering choice. Garrett Holloway. Most there didn't know him by name. A few recognized him by story. Retired firefighter. A man who had once charged into burning buildings without a second thought. A man who had lost everything in one fire he couldn't conquer. He spoke no words. just that single raised hand. Brooks hesitated. "Sir, the starting bid was—" Garrett nodded once. The movement was small, but final. "Sold." A murmur rolled through the barn like the early rumble of a coming storm. Confusion. Curiosity. A few shook their heads. One or two whispered the same question. Why? Why would anyone take a broken dog, especially that dog? Pity? Foolishness? A mistake. Garrett rose from his seat, moving down the steps of the gallery without hurry. His gait was steady, though time had given him a slight hitch in his step. The dog, the pit bull who would soon have a name but did not yet, lifted his head. For the first time since entering the ring, his body stopped trembling. As Garrett approached, he didn't reach out or grab. He knelt slowly, keeping himself at the dog's level. His hand rested open and patient on his knee. The pit bull eyed him, legs stiff. Chest rising and falling in short, shallow breaths. Around them, the barn seemed to fall into a hush that no one quite intended. Then the dog did something no one expected. He took one step forward, just one, and leaned, cautiously, almost imperceptibly, against Garrett's hand. There was no growl, no flinch, no drama. Just the fragile, powerful act of two battered souls finding the smallest, quietest moment of trust. Someone in the crowd recorded it on their phone. The footage, shaky and brief, would later ripple across the internet, shared by strangers who felt something they couldn't quite explain. The image of an old man and an injured dog, still and silent in the chaos of an auction barn. But no video could capture the full story. No one knew, not yet, that Garrett Holloway had not just lifted his hand out of charity, or impulse, or loneliness. It was a promise. A vow not just to the pit bull before him, but to ghosts both old and recent. To a fire he could never undo. To a daughter's dream left unfinished. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of redemption. For both of them. The drive back to Bitterroot felt longer than it should have. The old pickup rumbled along the winding roads, its engine groaning at every incline, as if it, too, was carrying a weight heavier than mere metal. Garrett kept his eyes steady on the road ahead, though his mind wandered to the passenger seat beside him. The pit bull, the dog that had known only numbers and scars until now, lay curled in the seat, his body tense, even in sleep. His breathing was shallow, interrupted now and then by a tremble that ran through his legs. Garrett had seen that kind of restlessness before, in the eyes of survivors who had made it out of burning buildings, but left pieces of themselves behind. As they reached the outskirts of the forest, the familiar scent of pine and earth seeped through the truck's cracked window. Garrett's cabin came into view, half hidden by the tall trees that edged the Bitterroot wilderness. It was a modest place. A porch with peeling paint. A roof that leaned slightly under years of snow and rain. To most, it looked forgotten. But to Garrett, it was the only place that had held him together when everything else had fallen apart. He parked the truck and shut off the engine. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was deep, heavy, and filled with the weight of unspoken things. Garrett walked around to the passenger side and opened the door slowly. The dog flinched at the creak of the hinges, but didn't growl or snap. His eyes opened, wary, alert. "It's all right," Garrett murmured. His voice was low, calm. Not an order, an invitation. With patience, he reached in and lifted the dog into his arms. The pit bull tensed at first, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. But Garrett didn't rush. He held the dog gently, as one might hold something sacred or fragile. "You're home now," he whispered. The cabin's door opened with a soft groan. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke from the hearth. Garrett had already laid out an old flannel blanket by the fireplace, along with a couple of towels to cushion the pit bull's aching joints. He set the dog down carefully. The pit bull, not yet named, didn't move. He sat still, his eyes darting to every corner of the room, mapping the exits, calculating threats. Garrett knelt beside him, resting one hand on the floor. "You need a name," he said softly. "Can't just keep calling you Dog, can we?" The dog didn't respond, of course. But his ears twitched. Garrett thought for a moment. Names carried weight. They could heal or they could burden. "Titan," he said finally. "That's who you are now." The name wasn't chosen for pity. It was chosen because, despite everything, this dog had endured. He had not given up, just like the titans of old, who bore the weight of the world itself. For a while, Garrett simply sat there. He didn't reach out, didn't force the dog to acknowledge him. He just stayed present. Outside, the forest whispered with the breeze. Inside, the fire crackled softly as Garrett added a few logs. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the chill of Montana's early winter. As night deepened, Titan remained stiff, his body curled into a tight, defensive ball. Any time the cabin creaked or the fire popped, he flinched. His eyes never fully closed. Sleep, it seemed, was not something he trusted. Garrett didn't blame him. Long after the fire had settled into glowing embers, Garrett lay down a few feet away on a second blanket. His old bones protested, but he ignored them. Sharing the space mattered more than comfort. Minutes turned into hours. Titan watched him the entire time. Then, sometime past midnight, a shift happened. It was not dramatic, no grand gesture, just a small, hesitant movement. Titan uncurled slightly. His muscles relaxed, not fully, but enough to mark a change. He stretched one leg forward. Paused. Studied Garrett as if weighing consequences only he understood. Then he placed his paw, rough, scarred, but steady, gently on Garrett's hand. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it held the weight of every moment of fear, every betrayal, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this human would be different. Garrett remained still, his breath steady. He didn't speak. Words would have ruined the purity of the moment. In the quiet that followed, Titan didn't retreat. He leaned slightly into Garrett's touch, letting out a slow, shuddering sigh. It was not the sigh of relief, but of surrender, not to a master, but to a new chapter he had not believed was possible. For the first time in what felt like years, Garrett closed his eyes, not in grief, but in cautious hope. When dawn broke, the cabin filled with soft gray light. Birds stirred in the trees. Frost edged the window panes. Titan was still there, his paw resting on Garrett's hand. They had not spoken a single command or promise. But an understanding had been forged in silence. Healing, Garrett thought, did not come from force or expectation. It came from patience. From choosing every moment, not to demand, but to offer. And in that quiet room, beneath the gaze of the forest and the watchful eyes of the past, two survivors, one man, one dog, found the first fragile thread of trust that would lead them both home. The drive to Dr. Rachel Monroe's clinic took longer than usual. Garrett wasn't in a rush, and neither was Titan. The dog sat in the passenger seat, his body still stiff, but his breathing calm. Every time they hit a bump in the gravel road, Titan's ears twitched, but he no longer tried to bolt or retreat. Progress came in inches, not miles. The veterinary clinic stood on the edge of town, nestled between a row of aging cottonwoods. A faded wooden sign read, "Monroe Veterinary Care." The letters softened by years of Montana weather. Garrett pulled into the gravel lot and killed the engine. For a moment, neither he nor Titan moved. "You ready, boy?" Garrett asked softly. He wasn't expecting a reply, but Titan surprised him by shifting forward, his head nudging Garrett's elbow as if to say, "Let's get this over with." Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and fresh pine cleaner. The receptionist, a young woman with bright eyes, looked up from her desk and froze. Her gaze dropped to Titan, her expression shifting from polite welcome to concern. "I'll get Doctor." "Monroe," she said, disappearing through a side door. Garrett took a slow breath and glanced at Titan. The pit bull sat quietly, but his eyes were alert, watching every corner of the waiting room. Not out of curiosity, out of habit. He was scanning for exits, escape routes, threats. It was the behavior of someone who had never been safe. The door swung open, and Dr. Rachel Monroe stepped out. Time had silvered her hair at the temples, but her eyes remained the same sharp green Garrett remembered. She paused, her gaze locking onto the dog first, not Garrett. "That him?" she asked quietly. Garrett nodded. Rachel crossed the room without hesitation. She crouched low, hands open and relaxed. "Hey there, big guy," she murmured. Titan tensed but didn't pull away. "I see you've been through a lot." Garrett's throat tightened. "More than you can imagine." Rachel straightened and gestured toward the exam room. "Let's take a look." Titan followed them in without needing to be leashed. That alone spoke volumes about how far he'd come. Inside, Garrett lifted Titan onto the padded exam table. The dog sat stiffly but didn't resist. Rachel began with a gentle touch, running her fingers along Titan's spine, ribs, and legs. She murmured calming words with each motion, a habit she'd developed back when she and Garrett's daughter, Emily, had volunteered together at animal shelters. The examination started routinely. Surface scars. Old fractures that had healed badly. But as Rachel moved to Titan's flank and began parting the fur, her hands froze. "These aren't from fights or accidents," she whispered. Garrett leaned in. "What do you mean?" Rachel traced the edges of several scars. They were circular, patterned, some fresh, some faded with time. "These are pressure burns, electrical, controlled. Someone did this to him, intentionally." Garrett felt his stomach twist. "Like a shock collar?" Rachel nodded grimly. "But worse. This was deliberate conditioning, teaching him to fear, to obey, or maybe to fight." The room fell silent except for Titan's slow, steady breathing. Rachel moved to Titan's neck. "Let's check for a chip. Maybe we can find where he came from." She retrieved the scanner and swept it gently along Titan's shoulder blades. A soft beep broke the quiet. "There's one," she said. She turned to the nearby computer, plugging in the scanner's code reader. The screen flickered to life, pulling up a registration number from a national database. As the data loaded, Garrett felt the air thicken around them. Name. Subject. 1479 breed. American Pit Bull Terrier. Status. Former training asset. Iron Vale compound. Now defunct. Garrett's heart stalled. He stared at the name on the screen, the weight of memory crashing down like a landslide. Iron Vale. He had heard that name before. Long ago. Rachel's voice dropped. "Garrett, wasn't Iron Vale the place?" "Yes." His voice was hoarse. "That was the facility that caught fire. The one I responded to." Years ago, back when Garrett had still been active as a firefighter, they had been called to a remote property where smoke billowed black against the Montana sky. They'd thought it was a barn fire. Instead, it had been a secret training compound. Underground dogfighting. Cruelty beyond words. Garrett remembered pulling animals from the wreckage, coughing through smoke, the cries of terrified, injured dogs echoing in his ears. They had saved a few. Not nearly enough. Too many had been left behind because the fire made the building too unstable. They had run out of time. Rachel scrolled further down the report. Owner of record, Mason Reddick. Garrett closed his eyes. The name tasted like ash. Mason Reddick, the man who had vanished after the fire. Authorities had searched for him, but he had slipped away, leaving only rumors and debts behind. Titan stirred slightly on the table, sensing the tension. Rachel's voice softened. Garrett, this dog isn't just any rescue. You two have crossed paths before. Garrett reached out, laying a hand gently on Titan's broad shoulder. I know, he whispered. I didn't see it before, but now I do. The scars, the fear, the way Titan had leaned into him at the auction without hesitation. It wasn't just trust. It was recognition. Titan had been one of the dogs trapped inside Iron Vale that day. A frightened pup, too small to fight, too helpless to flee. Garrett had likely passed him by in the smoke and chaos, forced to leave him behind when the building started to collapse. And now, after all these years, fate had brought them back together. But it wasn't just chance. It was a reckoning. Garrett felt the familiar ache of guilt stir deep in his chest. Not just the guilt of a rescuer who had failed, but the guilt of a father who had not been able to save his daughter from her own fire. The same helplessness, the same weight. Titan wasn't just a victim. He was a survivor, just like Garrett, and perhaps, together, they could finally lay some of those old ghosts to rest. Rachel squeezed his arm gently. What do you want to do? Garrett's eyes hardened with resolve. We find out if Mason Reddick is still out there. The days after the vet visit unfolded with a heavy, restless quiet. Garrett couldn't shake the weight of what Rachel had found. Titan's scars weren't just wounds. They were a roadmap to the darkest chapter of Garrett's past, one he had tried for years to bury beneath the routine of solitude and silent regret. But the past had a way of clawing its way back. And this time, it wasn't going to be ignored. Garrett spent long hours at his old oak desk, digging through boxes of papers he had stored away in the shed behind the cabin. Faded newspaper clippings, fire department reports, receipts, anything that might trace back to Mason Reddick and the Iron Vale compound. Rachel brought over veterinary records from the shelters she still volunteered at. She had always kept meticulous notes, even when it seemed like no one else cared. We'll find something, she assured him. People like Reddick don't disappear. They change their masks, but they don't change their nature. Titan stayed close through it all. Wherever Garrett moved, the dog followed, his steps steady, but his eyes always alert. At first, Garrett thought Titan was merely adapting to his new home. But soon, he realized the pit bull wasn't just staying near for comfort. He was guarding. It started with small signs, the way Titan would pause at the doorway each evening, sniffing the air with a sharp focus. How he bristled whenever the wind shifted from the north. How one night, while Garrett reviewed a particularly grim report from the Iron Vale investigation, Titan suddenly rose from his blanket and stood rigid at the window. His nose lifted, his muscles tightened. A low growl rolled from his throat, deep and deliberate. "What is it, boy?" Garrett murmured, rising to stand beside him. Titan didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply stared out into the darkness beyond the tree line, the fur along his spine standing on end. Garrett switched off the desk lamp, letting his eyes adjust to the moonlight streaming through the cabin windows. At first he saw nothing, just shadows stretching between the pines and the occasional flicker of a branch swaying in the breeze. Then he spotted it. A figure, barely more than a silhouette, standing just beyond the property line. The man didn't move, he didn't wave. He watched. Titan pressed forward until his nose touched the glass. His growl deepened, but not out of fear. Recognition. Garrett's stomach sank. Titan knew that scent, and Garrett, though he couldn't smell it, remembered Rachel's words. The chemical traces of gunpowder and metal, the scent burned into the dogs trained for violence. By the time Garrett grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the figure was gone. But the message was clear. Someone knew they were looking into Iron Vale. And someone wanted them to stop. The next morning, Garrett called in an old contact, Deputy Marshal Ethan Cole. They met at the diner in town, seated in the back booth away from the early morning crowd. Ethan had the kind of weathered face that told of years chasing down men who thought they could outrun justice. His badge might have been polished, but his eyes were tired. "Been a while, Garrett," Ethan said, stirring his coffee. "Didn't expect to hear from you again." Garrett laid out the file Rachel and he had compiled. The veterinary reports, the old fire department records, the database registration from Titan's chip, and the name they both recognized. Mason Reddick. Ethan scanned the papers without interrupting. He didn't flinch when he reached Reddick's name. Instead, he leaned back and exhaled heavily. "I thought that devil was long gone," Ethan muttered. "So did I," Garrett replied. "But he's not. I think he's still running dogs. Titan, he's the proof." Ethan nodded. "You said there was someone watching the cabin?" Garrett confirmed with a slow, grim nod. Titan recognized the scent. Gunpowder. "Metal, same as the compound." Ethan tapped a finger against the table, his mind already moving into strategy. "All right. I'll pull some strings, quietly. We can't tip Reddick off. He's slippery, and if he knows we're looking, he'll vanish again." By the end of the meeting, Ethan had one more piece of information. A string of land purchases in Wyoming, listed under shell companies. Remote properties far from public roads. One in particular caught his attention. Recent activity. Large shipments of feed and fencing materials. And a new name attached to the deed. "Carter Ray," Ethan read aloud. "But that's a ghost." "No records before last year." Garrett's jaw tightened. "An alias." Ethan nodded. "Likely." "And the property?" "Fits the profile. Isolated. No neighbors for miles." Garrett leaned forward, his voice low but determined. "We have to go. We have to know." Ethan held his gaze. "You sure about this? Once we step in, there's no turning back." "I'm done turning away," Garrett replied. "It's time." Titan, sitting quietly at Garrett's side, let out a soft, rumbling breath, as if he understood every word. Garrett wasn't a man haunted by his past anymore. He was a man facing it. The plan came together in quiet urgency. Garrett, Rachel, Titan, and Deputy Marshal Ethan Cole gathered in the cabin's small kitchen, maps spread out over the old wooden table. The air was heavy with the scent of pine, coffee, and the unmistakable tension of people preparing to walk into danger. The property in Wyoming, the one purchased under the false name Carter Ray, had been confirmed as active. Satellite images showed new fencing, fresh tire tracks, and what appeared to be temporary kennels hidden beneath tarps. But it was Titan who confirmed what the maps could not. The moment Garrett unfolded the satellite photo, Titan leaned forward, sniffing the paper, then let out a low growl. His body stiffened, eyes sharp. "That's it," Garrett said softly. "That's the place." Rachel placed a calming hand on Titan's back. "You sure you're ready for this, old boy?" Titan didn't flinch. He stood tall, his head high, no longer the trembling creature from the auction house. He was ready. The night they chose for the operation was moonless. Clouds blanketed the sky, casting the Wyoming wilderness in darkness. Ethan had arranged for backup, but only a small trusted team. They couldn't risk tipping off Reddick's network. Garrett drove his truck with Titan riding shotgun, Rachel and Ethan following close behind. As they neared the property, the smell of damp earth mixed with the metallic tang of cold air. Titan pressed his nose against the window, muscles taut. He wasn't afraid, he was leading them home. At the perimeter, Garrett killed the engine. Flashlights clicked on, beams cutting through the shadows. Ethan's team fanned out, moving in silence. Titan stepped from the truck without hesitation. His paws hit the ground with purpose. He sniffed the air, turned toward the eastern side of the compound, and started forward. No commands. No leash. He knew where to go. They followed him past rusted gates and between rows of crude kennels. From within, the soft whimpers and growls of dogs reached their ears. Garrett's stomach clenched. The sounds were painfully familiar, a haunting echo of the fire at Iron Vale so many years before. Rachel moved ahead, bolt cutters in hand. She snapped the chains on the first kennel. Inside, two pit bulls cowered together, their bodies thin but their eyes bright. They hesitated until Titan stepped forward, giving a low, reassuring rumble. The dogs responded, tails wagging tentatively. "Good boy," Garrett whispered. As they worked their way through the compound, they freed more dogs. Shepherds, pit bulls, even a few mixed breeds. Some backed away in fear, others surged forward, desperate for human contact. Then, in a shadowed corner, Titan stopped. His body went still. He sniffed at a small, battered cage half hidden beneath a tarp. Garrett lifted the cover and froze. Inside was a pit bull pup, barely 6 months old. His fur was mottled with dirt and scars. One ear was torn, but his eyes, bright, deep brown, held a spark of hope that hadn't been extinguished. Rachel knelt down, cooing softly. "Oh, sweetheart." Garrett's voice broke as he said, "Hope." The name seemed to settle something in the pup. He gave a soft, uncertain wag of his tail. Titan lowered his head, sniffed the puppy gently, and gave a quiet whine. It was a sound of recognition, not of blood, but of shared survival. Suddenly, a shout split the night. "Get away from my dogs!" Mason Reddick emerged from the shadows, a shotgun in his hands. His face was older, harder, but Garrett recognized him instantly. The man who had built an empire of cruelty and had vanished into legend. Titan stepped in front of Garrett, positioning himself between the man and his human. "Stop right there," Ethan barked, raising his weapon. His team flanked him, guns drawn, but Mason's eyes weren't on the deputies. They were locked on Titan. "Well, well," Mason sneered. "Number 1479. I should have known you'd come back." He leveled the shotgun. "Attack," he ordered. The command was sharp, biting. The same order Titan had likely heard countless times during his brutal training. For a breathless moment, silence stretched across the clearing. Then Titan did something no one expected. He sat, calm, defiant. He looked Mason squarely in the eyes and chose not to obey. He chose freedom. He chose forgiveness. Mason's face twisted in rage. He raised the gun. Before he could pull the trigger, Ethan's voice rang out. "Federal agents, drop your weapon." Mason hesitated, just long enough. A warning shot cracked through the night. Mason froze. Then the weight of years and consequences seemed to collapse him. The gun dropped from his hands. Deputies swarmed him, cuffing his wrists. Garrett exhaled, heart pounding. He reached down and rested a hand on Titan's broad head. "You did it, boy. You chose who you wanted to be." Titan leaned into the touch, his body steady, no longer burdened by fear or anger. The rescued dogs were loaded into transport vehicles. Rachel gently lifted Hope, cradling the pup close. Titan walked beside them, his limp barely noticeable now. His eyes no longer scanned for danger. They searched only for the next step forward. As Mason was driven away in the back of a deputy's vehicle, Garrett watched the man who had once wielded power over so many lives. Now he was just another criminal headed for judgment. Garrett turned to Titan. "We're not victims anymore." Titan gave a soft, approving growl. They were survivors. No, more than that. They were protectors now, and the journey toward justice and healing had only just begun. The sun rose softly over the Bitterroot Valley, casting long golden rays across the fields that had once stood silent and forgotten. Now they were alive with new purpose. Fences had been repaired. Fresh wood stained a warm honey color framed open exercise yards. Rows of kennels, not cages, but safe havens, lined the northern edge of the property. A new sign greeted visitors at the entrance: Hollow Haven Sanctuary. Beneath the name, in smaller letters, the words read, "For those who were left behind, and those who chose to return." Garrett stood at the gate early that morning, a mug of coffee warming his hands, though the cool spring air still nipped at his skin. Titan sat beside him, strong and steady, his gaze sweeping the open land as if he were surveying his kingdom. But this kingdom wasn't built on dominance or control. It was built on trust, patience, and the belief that no soul, human or animal, should ever feel abandoned again. The journey to create Hollow Haven had not been easy. After Mason Reddick's arrest, there had been months of legal work, fundraising, and physical labor. But Garrett wasn't alone. Rachel had connected him with veterinary groups and rescue organizations. Ethan Cole had pulled strings to get official support, and even rallied a few of his fellow deputies to volunteer. And then there were the veterans. Word had spread quietly, through back channels and community boards. Older veterans, many of whom had found civilian life isolating, reached out. They wanted to help. Not just out of charity, but because they understood what it meant to feel discarded, to carry burdens unseen. Soon, Hollow Haven became not just a sanctuary for dogs, but a place where veterans found healing too. Every morning, Garrett watched as men and women who had once worn uniforms walked the grounds with the dogs. Some had visible injuries. Others carried wounds no one could see, but all of them shared the same quiet understanding with the dogs they now cared for. Titan had become their guide. He wasn't just the first rescued. He was the leader, the steady presence every new dog looked to when uncertainty crept in. When frightened dogs arrived, cowering and snapping out of instinct, it was Titan who approached them first. He would lower his head, offer a calm, gentle presence, and wait as long as it took for trust to grow. No rush, no demands. Hope, the pit bull pup Garrett had rescued from Reddick's compound, became Titan's shadow. Though his small body still bore the scars of his past, his spirit remained unbroken. Wherever Titan went, Hope followed. The older dog taught the younger one not through commands, but through example. The sight of Titan and Hope walking side by side became a symbol around the sanctuary. It spoke of survival, of mentorship, of the power of choosing kindness when the world had once offered only cruelty. One afternoon, a volunteer named Clara, a retired Marine, captured a video on her phone. It showed Titan and Hope leading a group of new rescues around the main yard. The dogs followed in a loose, tentative pack, some limping, others still shy, but all moving together. Clara posted the clip online with a simple caption, "From abandoned to leaders." Healing is possible. The video went viral within days. People from across the country commented, shared, and sent messages of support. Donations poured in. Offers to adopt or foster the rehabilitated dogs followed. But more than that, survivors, both human and canine, reached out with their own stories of resilience. A local news crew visited Hollow Haven shortly after. They interviewed Garrett near the sanctuary's main barn, with Titan sitting calmly at his side. "Why did you do this?" the reporter asked, microphone poised. Garrett glanced down at Titan, then out across the fields where volunteers and dogs walked beneath the wide Montana sky. "I didn't," he replied. "We did, all of us." And the truth is, the heroes here aren't the people who built fences or filed paperwork. The heroes are the ones who survived, the ones who still stand after everything they've endured. He paused, reaching down to scratch behind Titan's ears. Titan here, Hope, and every dog who chose to trust again. They're the heroes. They're the ones teaching us what resilience really looks like. The reporter nodded, visibly moved. Before leaving, the crew filmed Titan and Hope, leading the newest arrivals on a gentle walk around the pasture. As the sun dipped low, the scene was bathed in gold and quiet strength. That night, as Garrett sat on his porch watching the stars blink to life overhead, Titan rested at his feet. Hope lay curled nearby, already drifting into sleep. Garrett sipped his coffee, though it had gone cold long ago. He thought of Emily, his daughter, of the dreams she had once shared about building a place like this, a safe harbor for animals no one else would take in. She had passed before she could make that dream a reality. But now, Hollow Haven stood not just as a refuge, but as a testament. Garrett whispered to the night, "We finally did it, kiddo." Titan stirred, as if sensing the weight of the words. "No one gets left behind anymore," Garrett added. In the darkness, the soft breeze carried the scent of pine and grass. It was peaceful, but not the peace of forgetting. It was the peace that came from doing the hard work of redemption, from choosing, again and again, to turn pain into purpose. And as Garrett looked down at Titan and Hope, he knew one truth above all. Sometimes, the second chance isn't just for those you save. It's for yourself, too. Spring melted into early summer at Hollow Haven Sanctuary. The long Montana winter had given way to soft green grass, wildflowers edging the pastures, and a sky so wide it seemed to swallow yesterday's sorrows whole. Garrett stood at the main gate with a wooden sign cradled carefully in his arms. The paint was fresh, the lettering hand-carved and stained dark against the light cedar. His fingers brushed over the words as he read them once more, though he already knew them by heart. For Emily's dream, the name of his daughter. The name of the dream she had once spoken of at the dinner table so many years ago, her eyes bright with purpose. "Dad," she had said, "someday I'm going to open a place where every dog gets a second chance, even the ones nobody else wants." He had smiled at the time, thinking it was a beautiful wish. He never imagined it would become a vow he would one day fight to fulfill, long after she was gone. Garrett mounted the sign above the gate. As he stepped back, The early morning sun spilled across the letters, turning them gold. A soft nudge at his side pulled him from his thoughts. Titan. The pit bull stood tall and calm, the gentle leader of the sanctuary. The same dog who, not long ago, had trembled beneath the weight of fear and scars. Now his body was solid with health, his eyes wise and steady. A slight limp still marked his steps, a reminder of what he had endured, but it no longer slowed him. Titan had become more than just a survivor. He was a protector, a guide for the new dogs who arrived frightened and unsure. He taught them what Garrett had taught him, that not all hands hurt, that trust could be rebuilt, and that no past was too dark for a second chance. Trailing behind Titan was Hope, the young pit bull pup who had once known only cages and pain. Now, Hope bounded across the grass, her tail high, and her eyes bright with curiosity. She paused at the gate, looking up at the sign as if she understood the meaning of the words carved above her head. "You've both come a long way," Garrett said softly. Titan's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. He leaned his weight gently against Garrett's leg, a gesture that had become their shared language of reassurance. Not far off, Rachel knelt in the grass, helping a new arrival, a shepherd mix with a torn ear and cautious eyes, take its first steps beyond the transport crate. One of the veterans, Thomas, stood nearby, offering calm words and a steady hand. More volunteers worked along the fence line and in the kennels, each finding purpose, not just in saving dogs, but in healing themselves. The sanctuary was no longer just an idea. It was a living, breathing promise. Garrett took a deep breath and let the crisp morning air fill his lungs. Later that day, a family arrived from out of state. A father, mother, and their teenage daughter. They had seen the video of Titan and Hope online, the one where Titan had led a gentle walk of rescued dogs around the yard. The family was there to adopt. Garrett watched as Titan approached the daughter first. She knelt down, and the old pit bull rested his chin softly on her knee. Hope followed close behind, tail wagging furiously. "They've been through a lot," Garrett told them. "So has she," the father replied, glancing at his daughter, whose smile masked the quiet weight of her own challenges. Garrett nodded. "Then they'll understand each other." By evening, Hope had a new family. Titan watched her climb into the family's truck, his posture proud, not possessive. He had prepared her for this, to move forward, to teach others what she had learned here. As the dust settled behind the departing vehicle, Garrett felt the familiar ache of goodbyes. But this one was different. It wasn't loss. It was the fulfillment of the sanctuary's purpose. He turned back toward the pasture. Titan stood beside him, gazing out at the dogs who remained, at the volunteers, at the families who would come tomorrow, and the day after that. "You kept the promise," Garrett whispered. Not just the promise to Emily, though that had been the start, but the promise to every creature who had ever felt forgotten, to every broken thing that could be mended with patience, love, and time. Night fell gently over Hollow Haven. The stars blinked into view, scattered like seeds across the dark sky. Garrett settled into his old rocking chair on the porch. Titan lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. The porch light cast a soft circle around them, but beyond it, the sanctuary stretched, wide and safe. For the first time in years, Garrett felt a deep, quiet peace. No more running from memories, no more hiding from what he couldn't fix. He had faced it all, and in doing so, he had created something that would last beyond his own lifetime. For Emily's dream. As he closed his eyes, Garrett whispered the words he had once thought he would never have the chance to say. No one in this family gets left behind. Not anymore. And in the stillness, as Titan stirred and rested his head against Garrett's boot, the weight of the past finally lifted. The story had come full circle. But the message would carry on. In a world where pain and loss often spoke louder than hope, sometimes it only took one person raising their hand at the right moment to change a life. Or, in this case, to change many. As the sun set over Hollow Haven, it wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of a legacy. Garrett, Titan, and every soul they saved proved that even in the darkest moments, hope can rise. As a wise saying goes, it's never too late to be what you might have been. Remember, the smallest act of courage, a raised hand at the right moment, can change a life forever. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice helps us grow, and your support fuels our mission to tell stories that heal and inspire. What does hope mean to you? Share your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation alive.